I mean, this is a hard slot, isn't it? It's one of the last ones of the day, and here we are, and we all want to look forward to a drink, and it's been heaps of stuff on our minds in order to think about. But I'm going to try and make this as entertaining as possible, and I'm going to try and be as gently provocative as possible in terms of what I talk to you about. Now, this is going to be a speaker plus a panel session, so I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, give or take, and then I've got 3 people that are going to join me here, and they're going to share some perspectives on this as well, right? And what we're going to be talking about is the digital divide, or more importantly, the digital divides, more than one. And I'm going to challenge you all, I think, to adopt the same degree of passion that you've had for infrastructure and connectivity and expand your thinking a bit as to how we realise the true extent and value of those investments by focusing on other divides as well. So I'm going to do that by introducing the digital divides. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about us. I'm sure that our fame as an organisation precedes us. We are InternetNZ. We are proudly the home of the .nz domain space, which we have that privilege for nearly 25 years to look after .nz for New Zealand. Now, what we also do is through community grants, research and policy, we help New Zealand harness the power of the internet, right? And we want all New Zealanders to be able to share in what we think is an awesome and fantastic resource. And I keep coming back to that theme of all New Zealanders, right? As I talk here today over the next 15 minutes. Because I think that's why we're all here, right? Talking about rural connectivity too, because we want all New Zealanders, regardless of where they live geographically, to have access to world-class infrastructure. Because that's always been one of the digital divides. So I wanted to have a look at connectivity first. I say here that connectivity is only part of the story. It is, but let's just do a little bit of a stock take on where we're at with connectivity. Now, I want to be really careful with how I position this with you people, because I realise that this is like one of the key themes for why we all gather here today. Connectivity matters, right? Making sure that networks are high quality, world class, and available to as many people as possible matters. It is a necessary condition for making sure that people can get online, that there's a network that they can access. Here's where those people are, right? That's a really zoomed out hexagonal graph, which you can see where the sources are. And Sam, yes, hi Sam, thank you for drawing this yet again. How many people get maps drawn by Sam? If you're not, you should. This is where people live in New Zealand, right? And now I'm going to overlay over this where fibre networks are. As you can see, the map hasn't changed much. That's not going to be a surprise to anyone. There's blue bits on this map now if you can't see them. They're the likes of here, around Christchurch and Auckland, and the urban bits. No surprises. There, right? We all know that fibre doesn't do a great job, necessarily, of meeting geography. It does a great job of population density, does a great job in urban areas, does a fantastic job there in terms of providing people with gigabit speeds. But that's because it relies on, in an economic sense, the density of those populations in order to work. So look, this is a world-class fibre outcome story in a sense, right? And this is UFB as of 2021, so this is a forecast too over some of the next round of investments, where those networks are going out to something like 88% of the population, 88% of the New Zealand population having gigabit fibre. That's a world-class outcome, my friends. Not many countries can stand back and say, we have 88% of our population with fibre connectivity and that sort of speeds. Particularly too when you consider that we're a long, thin country with not much in the way of population and a whole pile of mountains in the middle, which makes rolling out fibre and stuff hard. So fibre isn't the answer, is it? So let's overlay, though, some of those other infrastructures that we see. And now we've got UFB and the blue still, a wider set of assets, and RBI2 things here too. The main thing I want you to see is how much pink is left. Try to spot some pink. I can't when I look at these slides, right? I'm not saying that there isn't people that aren't left out of these investments. I know there's not. We all know there's not. I'm not saying that there won't be people that don't have an acceptable level of service. I'm not saying that there won't be farm assets or other sorts of things that we want to do with this infrastructure that isn't covered by that coverage. What I am saying, though, is that this is a fantastic infrastructure story, right? And that while this is zoomed out and it hides a lot of detail, that by the time we have finished rolling out many of these investments that are in the pipeline right now, we would have solved the vast majority of connectivity-based infrastructure challenges in this country. The vast majority of, not all of. I'm standing up here before I get a barrage of questions saying about how I'm dismissing some connectivity concerns. I'm not. I'm just saying that we would have solved a very great deal of what's going on. Be proud of that, because I think conferences like this and people like you have done a great job of pushing for and creating an environment where this investment has had to be necessary. You have demanded and asked for better in terms of nationwide coverage and connectivity solutions. And look at it. Look at what we will have. Don't be under any illusion that many, many countries around the world are so jealous of this story. Right? Let alone the fact that it is hard to build this story here in New Zealand. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep pushing for more and for better. Doesn't mean that we should lose our eye off the ball of making sure that those that aren't part of that story in the detail, the valleys, the families and the households that haven't got that world-class connectivity get it too. I'm here today to talk about some ands, right? I'm here today to say that you should keep pushing for world-class connectivity and infrastructure, and you should push for action on a wider set of digital divide-related issues. Why am I saying that? Because there is more than one digital divide. Of course there's more than one digital divide. When we think about it, we all know that, right? We all know that it's not sufficient just to sit there and roll fibre in front of somebody's house and then stand back and go, value, growth, opportunity. We all know that putting a different wireless transmitter on a tower doesn't equal great outcomes in of itself. We know that connectivity is part of how we solve this, not all of how we solve this. What else is there, though? And this is a framework that I want to introduce you to, and I want to tell you some stories, right? And this framework came from a report called Out of the Maze. And this was a piece of work that we did with the Vodafone Foundation, and it was done by Mary and Elliot at the workshop. We published it last year. If you want to see it, you can go to digitaldivides.nz and you can see the whole report. It's pretty fascinating because it documents this. It documents the rest of the story, right? And I actually want to introduce these concepts to you and read some of the verbatim pieces of feedback that they heard from New Zealanders about what these issues mean. So forgive me, I'm going to look at my phone a little bit. I'm actually going to start with number 2, actually, the physical barriers to access one, because that is the part of the report that includes some of this infrastructure stuff too, right? There's a wide variety of stories in that report, but here's one I want to share from Auckland, right? Where this respondent in that study said that they take their kids to the library. We sit outside because they don't have Wi-Fi at home. It could be late at night, but we'd be sitting there while my child does their homework, right? This is from urban New Zealand that is drenched in more world-class networks than you can shake a stick at, arguably. They've got multiple fibre networks, they've got wireless networks, they've got 3 mobile phone networks pumping out 4G, 5G technologies. And yet we've got New Zealanders who are sitting outside libraries because there's free Wi-Fi there. Other stories about how financial challenges, I want to refer to that category 1, and again I'll read you some of these things from this report. From a youth group in Westport that said some families struggle to pay for food and bills. This, the internet, would be the last thing on their agenda. When somebody from the Women's Refuge said your benefit can be cut off because you missed an appointment, because you didn't have access to the internet, because they emailed you, right? That we have whole ecosystems of government service now built around a presumption that you have connectivity, but then when you don't have connectivity, you can't access the same services. And the challenges in terms of what that means for equitable access to the help that people are trying to be given. A youth with visual impairment from Wellington. I have a beautiful, beautiful Surface Pro, which I got when I was first losing my visual ability. Now I can't frickin' use it because it's not accessible. Like, we can't make it large enough without too much movement. So I have a very expensive paperweight. There's 3 stories about what it means in that financial bucket. I'm going to keep on reading through these, actually. I hope you don't mind. A story about motivation, that 3rd category. A Mangere high school student said, "My parents, they grew up without the internet. So it's a thing they think you don't really need. Just wasn't a thing in their generation." Issues of trust and safety, that 4th category. A high school mentor also from Mangere. There was a couple of months back where some money was taken out of my bank account. It was only $40, so it was all right, but it's still money, right? And it was a concern. Only 2 more stories, I promise. In terms of skills, a teen parent from Kawerau. My nana uses it for the pokies. She's like, "How do you turn this thing on?" The thing. And she goes, "How come it's not working?" And I say, this person who was responding says, "We've got no internet." And my nana says, "What's the internet?" And finally, stories about capacity, and this was one of the concluding statements from that report, right? And they said this echoes what we've heard from participants, which is that the more adversity they faced in accessing the internet, the more likely they were to respond by stopping, which in turn led to further adverse outcomes which come from digital exclusion. People, we've got that world-class infrastructure story, right? But these are the divides that we have here in New Zealand. We've got networks that are capable of reaching nearly everybody in this country with world-class, enviable infrastructure. But I think we've got to have the same passion now for talking about financial barriers, physical barriers, motivational barriers, trust and safety barriers, skills barriers, and capacity barriers. Otherwise, I argue we've wasted some of that investment by leaving New Zealanders off it. Now, while I'm being all doom and gloom minded, right, I don't think that this is a small problem. I mean, it's really hard to know how many New Zealanders are impacted by this, right? One of the huge problems is research related in terms of defining how many people this impacts. But a lot of the common numbers stand back and say, might be 7 to 10% of the population. 7 to 10%. That sounds manageable, but I think percentages are illusionary, right? Because what does 7 to 10% of the population really mean? I mean, we can all do maths. That's 350,000 to 500,000 New Zealanders now. It's a huge part of our population that, due to an interplay of some of these issues, we are effectively saying those world-class investments and world-class networks aren't for you. I reckon we can solve this. I reckon it is solvable. After I've done my doom and gloom routine about how bad the story is, I do think it's solvable, and I think we can work together in order to solve it. And this is how I think we'd do it, right? We'd do it together. And I think we can do that because we've shown we can do that, because people in this room have done it already in terms of completely changing gear, in terms of a connectivity story in this country, right? You've done this. When I look back at that key challenge of where networks are, rooms like this have added together and changed the conversation and forced investment from government and the industry to do better and to push out more technology to more New Zealanders. Well done. Be proud of that. Keep pushing for that. It is part of this challenge. And push for these things too. Because that's how we're going to realise the full value of this infrastructure. We didn't just build connectivity to be able to stand back with bragging rights and say, shit, yeah, I've got 1 gigabit at home, right? We did it for the stories that we've heard here today about productivity benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, a better New Zealand benefits. We did this so that New Zealanders can get online and do stuff, not just so the network would exist, right? So let's realise the real, true value of this infrastructure that we've deployed. Let's use that world-class infrastructure to get some world-class economic and social outcomes too, because if we can square that circle, we'd have a way better New Zealand as well. And we can do that by working together across government, business, community and civil society. I say in the end they're a little bit of a kicker in terms of but smarter. I'm always amazed and so inspired by the number of different people and groups that are working on solving bits of these problems. But I'm also sometimes frustrated that I see a lack of coordination, a lack of investment in what we see works, a lack of collaboration, a lack of celebration in terms of seeing things that make a difference and pouring some oil on them, so to speak, so that more people can benefit from them. We know we can do this, though, because we've done it before. We've got the incentives to do it because it's how we realise the value of the infrastructure, and we'll get there by working together. Sounds so very easy. But I want to co-opt all of you into helping all of us realise and solve for those challenges. All right? So that's my pitch to get this speaker panel, I don't know, kicked off. I'd like to invite the following people to come up here and join me. They are Sara Passmore from Te Tumu Paeroa. I'd like to invite Robyn and Kamira from Paua Interface. And I'd like to invite Andrew Hoggard from Federated Farmers to come up. How I think we should do this is that I'm going to invite these guys to speak to 5 to 10 about how the digital divide plays for them. What do they see here? There are a wide variety of perspectives on this. And then, thanks to Slido, we're all more than happy to discuss this more and take some questions and some engagement. So how does that sound? Good. Good. There was no other answer apart from that. It sounded good, to be truly honest. So we never agreed who was going to do this first. So can I run down this list?
Yep.
Do you want to go first?
Gladly get it out the way.
Too easy.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou. Ko Sara Passmore toku ingoa. I'm going to assume that very few of you know what Te Tumu Paeroa does or have even heard of Te Tumu Paeroa. But before we start talking about the organisation that I work for, I thought I'd get a little bit of an indication about what the room knows about the context in which we work. So we work in Māori land. And so before I start talking a little bit about that complexity around the digital divide, I might get you to tell me what you know about Māori land. So if I can get you to all stand up, please. Thank you. So I want you to stay standing if you think Māori land has something to do with the Treaty of Waitangi. All right, good. All right, so the next one is stay standing if you think Māori land has something to do with iwi. So it's like iwi owned. Something to do with iwi. All right. And finally, if you think Māori land has something to do with the Crown giving back land to Māori after treaty settlements. All right. All right. Making good progress, actually. So Te Tumu Paeroa looks after about 7... So you can sit down. I'll explain. We look after about 7% of all Māori land in New Zealand. That's Māori land that's left. Māori land used to be all of New Zealand. Treaty of Waitangi was signed. Huge amounts of Māori land went to the Crown. And some parts of Māori land managed to be retained by the original owners. So it's land that's largely hapu or whānau based, so it's still retained by them, makes up about 7% of New Zealand. So Te Tumu Paeroa looks after 100,000 hectares of Māori land, some of the remotest land in New Zealand. And what we've got is a really massive challenge with what we do. So the general context of Māori land, what makes it different from general land, is that it's collectively owned. So Te Tumu Paeroa looks after 1,800 or so blocks of Māori land. That's on behalf of 100,000 owners. Typically, those owners have more than 2 ownerships. So we have 200,000 ownership interests on our database. So we've got a huge number of people we need to communicate with about their whenua. But we've got the challenge in that successive legislation has been aimed at alienating Māori from their whenua. So we've got early after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, only 10 Māori people could be added to the title of their ownership. So really early on, they were alienating owners of that land. And that legacy has continued today. So a couple of weeks ago, I went out to Koputara Trust out at Levin, and the whānau have only just been able to start accessing their whenua. It's been landlocked, and the neighbouring farmers, for generations, 120 years, have refused to give access rights to that whānau, so they've not been able to access their whenua. And now they have access to it, they're returning that to a wetlands. And so what we've got is a really complex range of issues around people connecting with their land. So why this is important for digital connection is that there's twofold reasons, really. One is our database. 18% of our database are marked as deceased, so we can't communicate with those owners. They've got no engagement in the land. They never will. But the next generations will. So we've got to contact the next generations of people and get them engaged. We only have contact details for about 60% of the owners that we know are alive. So there's a huge number of people that we can't communicate with about their land. And we hold $24 million in their accounts that we can't pay out. So it doesn't do us any good. We want that money out in the community. And it just grows and grows and grows because we invest it on their behalf. They get income from leasing the land. And so we really need people to connect with their whenua and go through the process of becoming Māori landowners from their deceased parents and things like that. So that's one of our challenges. And the other challenge is that people have never stepped foot on the land that they're owners of. And it's very likely they never will. So earlier today, we were talking about wanting to get people out into those rural communities, wanting to increase the rural workforce. We'd love to see more Māori landowners living and working on their whenua. But the disengagement is so high that it's really challenging. So what we've been trying to do at Tumu Paeroa around technology is not about increasing the technology available. Our owners are generally 55 plus. The trustees, they're 65 plus. We've got a really older group of people we're trying to engage with. They're Māori and they're rural. So we've got a really niche market. What we really want is to provide information that people can engage with through digital services so that they feel that they can confidently go into a room and make decisions about their land and take control of it. Return tino rangatiratanga back to the owners. It's no good having an organisation like Tumu Paeroa running land for those owners because it's further disenfranchising those Māori landowners. So we've done this by creating safe cultural spaces using digital tikanga that we're adopting, and that's something that's really developing as we go on. So for example, we have drones that fly over the whenua so that landowners can see what their land looks like. But we also know that there are urapa on a lot of much of the Māori land. And so we're currently debating whether owners want to see the urapa or will not want to see it. We know that some whānau have been posting tangi onto Facebook Live so that people can engage digitally with kind of death rights. So we're still having that debate about what digital tikanga looks in our context. And one of the challenges we're still grappling with is about this physical connection with the whenua and the digital connection, because these are not the same things. So we know that we can increase people to engage with the whenua digitally, but we're wondering if that is further alienating from actually connecting physically with the land. And when you think in a Māori context, that connection to whenua is a really big part of whānau ora, about well-being. And so we think we have a role to play in things like that healthcare, like in well-being for Māori. And so lots of things come into play. So finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've learned as we've developed these digital tools. And that is really about, if you want people to use your services, really design your services specifically for those people. We've got huge numbers of people that we're trying to engage with that are all part of this digital divide, and that's what we're really looking at. So I'm happy to answer any questions about how we've done that. And I've got some really great tools that I can share with you if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. That was spot on, right? In terms of a story about the use of digital technologies and the benefits that it can provide, that I don't actually think you really mentioned connectivity and network access once in terms of that spiel, right? So thank you. Nice job of the brief. Now, Andrew didn't hear the brief as to what he was going to talk about until the last afternoon break. So welcome to the stage, Andrew, and good luck.
Yeah. Thanks. I got told yesterday I was going to be on a panel, so I thought, I just sit here and answer a few questions. Now I find out I got to talk for 5 minutes, so usually not a problem for me, so we'll see how we go. Basically, in terms of the digital divide for farmers, and sort of average age of farmers is around 56. There is that expectation that they're not all that tech savvy, but I disagree with that to a degree. First and foremost, for me, and I've got to bring up connectivity, but it's not internet connectivity. I think sometimes the challenge is mobile connectivity out on the farms, which I think may be holding back a lot of the uptake. And to me, that's sort of what I want to talk about is, we've heard a lot this morning about the benefits all of this connectivity can do, IoT, around compliance, best practice, being able to lift up your farm business to do more. Why aren't more people doing it? And that's sort of the thing, to me, that's, I guess, the digital divide I'm sort of seeing out in the rural areas is we're not uptaking a lot of this stuff as well as we could be and utilising it as well as we could be. And just, I guess, a couple of points as to why I think that's the case. First point is knowing that it's available. If you're all day out there on the farm slogging away, doing stuff, you're not sitting around reading the paper, or maybe at lunchtime. But it's hard to know what's available and to actually take it all in. I went through field days and, there's lots of sites up there and you're looking on the outside and you're thinking, well, that looks quite techy. I wonder what they do. And then you see the salesman sort of lining you up like great white sharks and head off and keep moving. And so it's knowing what's available and also knowing how you can repurpose stuff. So I've got a bit of a number 8 wired sort of technology approach to my farm. And, I've just sort of see things that are used elsewhere and just gone, I wonder if I could do that and make it do this on the farm. And so I've just gone and repurposed things that shouldn't be used for farming. But it's, people being able to know that they can do that and use things in a certain way. So, it's that knowledge first up that I think is the key point to sort of bridging the divide for farmers. And then understanding the value that can be achieved for using all this stuff. Sort of really being able to quantify the dollar value of it. You heard about LIC space before, so I'm actually using that. And, that's a good example because it's real simple to see the value. Have someone spending the entire day walking around the farm to give me the numbers, which I then have to crunch in my head and work out for rotations, etc. Or bang, I get this photo, a list of numbers, and then I can do that work. Or in the case, LIC's not here at the moment, not 100% accurate just yet. So you do go and recalibrate on a few paddocks just to sort of balance it out. But, it's knowing what the value is, being able to, that's a simple one, 1 day's wages for a person doing that walking, or I think it's a couple $100 a month. So it's easy to work out. But a lot of these other technologies, it's sort of being able to sit down, have that spare time to actually calculate it out, what it's worth, what it's costing you to do things the old-fashioned way. As I mentioned before, the average age of farmers is about 58. There's that preconception that older people aren't that tech savvy, everyone need a little 12-year-old to show you how to do stuff, etc. And I think that sometimes, it sort of disenfranchises some of those farmers that think, they can't go and do this, or they'll get, view. I don't know. I just think that sometimes that sort of attitude sort of disenfranchises them. If I look at my father, when he went to school, it was chalk and blackboards. No little Google Chromebooks like my daughters have got. Yet, when the computer first came out, he bought one, didn't have an instruction manual, just worked out how to use it and so forth, all the technology on our farm. Me and him, we've just sort of worked out how to use it. It's because I guess we were, trained how to problem solve. We didn't have manuals for everything. We didn't have YouTube videos to show us how to do stuff. So I think, the older generation can actually uptake this stuff pretty well because they are used to problem solving. And, particularly I look at some of my 20-year-old staff members, and something's broken, they just stand there and stare at it. And it's like, come on, guys, use some common sense here, Obviously, this thing's hanging out there, so maybe if you put it back in, it'll work again. That's some of the challenges I think I see there. And I guess the other thing to uptake that, so you go through all those sort of things, that sort of creates that value for taking on that technology. And probably the other thing would be the collaboration, making sure that all this stuff actually talks to one another. That that really to me is going to add the value and lead to that wanting to uptake stuff. Because if all you're doing is entering data into or collecting data across multiple sort of platforms, devices, and all it does is sit in that device or that platform, doesn't talk to anything else, it doesn't add anywhere near as much value as if you can actually get it all talking together. And to me, that's one of the key challenges, I think, to get more uptake of technology in New Zealand agriculture is actually getting it all to talk to one another, being able to aggregate that information, use it wisely. To me, I think that's, if we can sort of get that sort of nut cracked, then we'll see a lot more uptake and a lot more use on farms. Hope that sort of covered the brief.
I reckon. It's always fantastic when you watch somebody score off a hospital pass, and I thought that was well done. And I want to build off that just in my own little way myself. Look, he's now deceased, unfortunately. My Uncle Richard farmed near Lumsden in northern Southland. Every time I talk about this, I often mention northern Southland. Who's heard of Lumsden? That's pretty good. I'll take that. It's on the road between Queenstown and Invercargill. Lovely little spot. In his 70s, keen on the idea, had heard of the idea of the tech, right? Ran into a lot of these things in terms of it was too hard to get started, so he gave up. That where does somebody in their 70s go to learn about this? It's really easy to think about how we teach school-age kids because we've got them trapped inside classrooms for like 30 hours per week. What do you do for those of us that have left school? And then how do you really actually build and deploy these things so that somebody, like the people that we're talking about here, actually go, okay, I can see how to get this done without having to turn up at field days and get stalked by those shark-like salesmen, perhaps. So thank you. That was spot on. Third, but by no means least, Robyn, over to you. Oh, and hey, reminder, this is a panel. I've got 4 questions on here. Come on, Slido. Do we all remember? Please? Thanks.
Kia ora, Andrew. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Craig, for inviting me. This is my second time here, actually on the stage, because last year I did a full presentation on Miti Miti on the Grid, which was all about divides and connecting and a lot of the things that both of you have talked about too. So it's really cool to hear that great overlap. Andrew also told me just before the session what this was about. So I prepared 10 speeches and 5-minute talks just on the off chance he might ask me for something. So we're talking about how the divide affects different groups. And I really liked what Andrew said and how he kind of positioned that in his speech. In fact, I was close to tears, I was joyful, I felt so inspired, and I hope you all did around this is something that we can all own about bringing these divides, narrowing them in the areas that we're in, and being very conscious about who's not in the room, who's not receiving something that makes a huge difference to us all as New Zealanders. I've separated the divides into 4 areas. So the first one is about logistics. Logistics are things like getting access to things that they wouldn't typically get access to easily, or it would be costly. So the tractor part, the medicine, the item that they bought off Trade Me, access to education, to jobs, to professional development, government services, really critical one right now. And that story that Andrew told about being cut off from the benefit, I've heard several times. Thank you, WINZ. You're doing a really great job. So that impacts definitely rural groups, and it also impacts Māori a lot. And there's a big overlap between rural and Māori, as you've just heard. The second divide I wanted to mention was connection. And I'm not talking about connectivity, I'm talking about connection, combating isolation. Social cohesion across geographic boundaries. For Māori, this might be about genealogy or belonging to a tribal group or identity. For the diaspora, it might be about connecting to whatever home is for them or to groups of interest that they may not have access to in their geographic space. That's all. Connection is all about getting access to the right information at the right time, the right people at the right time, the right services at the right time, the right help at the right time. That particularly impacts older people, rural people, low-income people. And then the third area of divide I wanted to talk about was rights. For some, it is about rights. It's about the right to access the same rights that we would expect to the other service to have rights to access to other services that we now take for granted, like electricity, like our road services, like our rubbish services. Right to access the government services, as I've already said, like IRD, for example, social and health services, emergency services, online voting. The New Zealand census last year had quite a poor result in uptake. I think they estimated, they're not telling us, by the way, so we can't prove it yet. They estimated about 90% uptake, which means 10% of New Zealanders were not counted. For Māori, that looked more like 20% that were not counted. And for rural Māori areas, it could be 30% not counted. So this has a huge impact, and particularly around electorates, around the way that the government designs its policies and access and its political environment is all informed by that census. Now, let me see. One of the other things I just wanted to briefly talk about access, and going back to mitimiti again, and also referencing the other two areas that you both talked about was age. And so there's this assumption and there's this stereotype that says if you're old, you've got no clue, the internet technology is not for you, you're not going to be able to do it. How many people in the room are over, I'm going to pick a nice neutral age, over the age of 40, and you feel comfortable around tech? You all put your hand down. What's wrong? So obviously that stereotype is nothing more than a stereotype, right? So ageism is rife in the tech sector. And I just wanted to tell the story of mitimiti on the grid. So we got fibre in there. We've got two supporters of that who are in the room, who were part of that project in 2014 and 2015 to get fibre into a very isolated marae. The area mostly has very young people or very much older age group, because the middle ones go elsewhere to work or go elsewhere to school. So I was there last week. We were doing an upgrade to their CCTV cameras, which, by the way, we have a surf cam to look over the sea for that connection, people connecting with home so they can see home, just like the drone story. But guess who was sitting on their devices the whole way through? All the ones that were over 55, constantly on their devices. And guess who was in the training workshop to help train locals to look after their own network and know who to call and what to say? They were all over 55s, and they were more than able. So I just want to break down that little barrier too. The other thing I want to talk about, at a lower level, we've talked about privacy and security, particularly around data, and we've had conversations about how these overseas companies that are gathering our data don't actually contribute back to the communities from which that data comes from. So we've got clearly some issues around exploitation, but also some risk factors around that. And I wanted to now take that bit of conversation up to an extreme level. In May, I was very privileged to be invited into a group to advise Jacinda Ardern around her Christchurch call before she went to Paris. So this was facilitated by InternetNZ to bring together some people who were not in the government sector to have a voice. And so it was really important. So after that attack, and before she went to Paris, she wanted to understand both the technical and societal, I guess, issues that needed to be addressed when she met with the various countries. And there was a very tight focus around this call, and I'm going to read it out specifically. Just a footnote too, I'm not talking about anything that is confidential or private right now. I'm talking about things that have already been made public. So the Christchurch call was a call to action to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online. It was extremely narrow. And the reason that she wanted it to be narrow, because she wanted it to be achievable, while maintaining a free, secure and open internet. But essentially, that Christchurch call was also about divides. It was about the right to trust and have confidence in the motivations and actions of those who control the internet and provide services on it. Importantly, it speaks to a much deeper divide than we've talked about so far, and a very serious imbalance where unaccountable individuals and companies like Facebook, like Google, like Twitter, are now determining the width and the breadth of how extreme content is valued, censored, and distributed. What the divide means here encompasses the three layers that I already spoke about. So that was logistics, connections, and rights. But it also brings us to the fourth divide, and that is power imbalance. Kia ora.
For those of you that weren't here last time when Robyn spoke, just a very quick plug for the Miti Miti on the Grid project, which was, and I am going to talk about connectivity for a bit, and stop me if I get any of this wrong. It doesn't get harder, I think, to build internet infrastructure to the marae that your project built infrastructure to there. A very isolated location that now has connectivity thanks to the work that Robyn did, and an example of, yes, a connectivity story, of how we can work together and try new things in order to bring people along for the ride. Thank you. We've got some questions. I'm going to run through some of them over the next 10 minutes. So let's go. One of them is for you, Sara. How do you engage with whānau who are on the disconnected side of the digital divide, and how are you encouraging those people to connect?
It's a really good question, because a lot of what we do in Māori organisations is face-to-face communication. So for a lot of the trusts that we manage, we hold hui regularly every 3 years. It's really complex because trying to get people to attend a meeting, they come from all over the country. We've got owners who are in Iceland. So it is the digital technology route that we use to engage people. So some of the things that work really well is Google Ads in Māori, or asking the question, are you Māori? Because people click on it, yes, and then that's the next route, is going through that process of, okay, look through our website, search for your whenua, look for your ancestors and see if they own whenua. There's some really great tools like Māori Land Online. It's great. It could be a lot better. One of the big challenges is getting information from Māori Land Online into our organisation's database because of the Privacy Act. So in order to inherit Māori land, you have to go through a Māori land court process. So you have to pay a fee. So you don't just naturally inherit the whenua. There's a big process. You have to go to court. There's a judge. The judge decides that you're an owner. And it's incredibly complex. And that's another form of the alienation for connecting to your land. So if we can encourage perhaps a little bit of ease between the information that government services like Māori Land Court get, sharing that with us, that would be really beneficial. At the moment, we might get a court order that will have an owner's name and their shareholding. So we'll have to ask them questions to prove their whakapapa so that we know who they are. get their address again, get their contact details again, and it's just really challenging. So some of that stuff around that connection is around how government agencies and organisations share data amongst themselves, and the sorts of things you were talking a little bit about, that security and the information online. And that's a really big challenge. How do we balance people's expectations of having really efficient services and that data protection and that security of their service data?
Fantastic. Thank you. I've got one here for you, Andrew. Mobile coverage, and this is let me start again. Mobile coverage is an issue on a lot of farms, as you said. Does that adversely affect farmers' access to emergency services?
In certain parts of the farm, it will. So we do every year a rural connectivity survey. And, one of the key sort of points that came out last year, and I still haven't been through all the comments this year, was that there's a lot of farmers who, have to warn contractors when they're coming onto the farm that, we don't have, do you have a telecom phone? Spark, sorry. Do you have a Vodafone phone? They need to find out which network they're on, because part of the farm may only have coverage for such and such. It's like on the top terrace of my farm, we've got Vodafone. Bottom terrace, part of it, it's Spark, and then part of it, it's a no-go zone. So when the media's hassling me, I just go to the no-go zone and do some fencing there. But yeah, it is definitely a big concern, particularly with health and safety. And you got a lot of apps nowadays which you can track people, but when they go into those dead spots, it sort of harms it all. And you can't expect the telcos to go and build a tower to cover your entire farm. It's about, I think, some of these agile and flexible solutions that you can add in that might sort of just boost. But it's knowing where to go for that stuff, because I'd be damn keen to buy boosters and buy little bits of kit here and there, but it's actually knowing this stuff exists and where to actually go looking. I just sort of end up trawling through Trade Me and go, and wonder if that'd work, and buy it for $1 and find out it doesn't work and throw it in the skip bin. So that's sort of it is a different challenge.
I've got one. I'm going to take this one for all three of you, actually, right? Like water, is it time to consider personal connectivity as a basic human right? Do you want to take that one on first, Robyn?
Sure. I thought I'd pull this up, but it's taped to the table. Here we go. Yes, of course it is. If connectivity gives you access to services that you have a right to and are expected to use, particularly government services, for example, then our government is obliged to provide that service to you. As simple as that to me.
What about you two, Sarah?
Yep, it's an easy yes for me, yeah. Especially when you think in terms of the amount of education that happens online and the amount of government services that are online, it's a no-brainer.
In terms of the fact that government's expecting, particularly for farmers, you're expecting us to fill in paperwork for this, that and the other thing. Overseer FM now is cloud-based. Nate, are you cloud-based, or you should be cloud-based? We've got all this stuff we're supposed to be entering data into, and so you need decent connectivity to be able to put it in there. So if government's wanting you to do stuff, they need to make it easy for you actually to do it.
And being able to crunch that data once it's online as well is really beneficial for society as well. So it's kind of a twofold payoff.
So I'm going to call the question short there. I'd like you to join me in terms of saying thanks to these fine three. Thank you for sitting up here. And I'm going to end on one last reiteration. This doesn't go back, but I am going to reiterate my key message. I do get it after all. We can solve this, right? We've solved bigger things than this. The capable people in this room have already solved a large part of the connectivity challenge. We can smash this as well with a bit of design, a bit of action, and a bit of collaboration. I'd like to work with all of you in terms of doing that, because at the end of the day, we spent billions of dollars building these networks. This is where the value is in terms of solving for this and bringing every New Zealander along for the ride. That's me.